The sun had barely crested the horizon when the Missouri River began to stir awake. Mist rose like slow-moving ghosts, wrapping the bend in a soft gray shroud. It was the kind of morning where the world felt half asleep, and only the sound of oars dipping in rhythm broke the stillness. Two brothers, Thomas Mercer, the elder at 38 with a thick beard and steady eyes, and Eli Mercer, 29, lean and hopeful, rowed out in their weather-beaten skiff. They had fished this river since they were boys, guided by their late father's voice still echoing in their minds. The river provides if you respect it. But the river hadn't been kind lately. The fish had grown scarce, the prices in town lower still, and the world seemed to have forgotten men like the Mercers. Eli squinted through the fog. "Feels strange today." Quiet Thomas grunted. "A quiet river's just a tired one. Keep rowing." Still, the younger brother couldn't shake the feeling that something beneath those rippling waters was waiting. The year 1875 had stripped the Mercers of nearly everything but grit. A dry summer had baked the soil to dust, killing crops and chasing catfish deep into cooler channels. Then came an early frost that froze half the nets they'd left overnight. At home, things were worse. Eli's wife, Mary, had fallen ill that winter with a fever that left her weak and coughing through the nights. Medicine from town cost more than they could earn in a week. Their savings, kept in a rusty tin box, held barely enough for flour and lamp oil. Thomas lived with them, partly out of loyalty, partly because the old Mercer cabin down by the marsh had collapsed years ago. Though he rarely said much, he carried the weight of responsibility like a man who'd long ago accepted that life's blessings were meant for others. Eli had hope. Thomas had endurance. And both needed the river that morning to deliver more than disappointment. For hours, their boat drifted along the current. They cast and reeled in silence, pulling up only two small catfish and a snapping turtle that bit through the line before Thomas could grab it. By noon, the sun had burned through the mist, revealing the muddy banks and distant cottonwoods. Eli rubbed the back of his neck, frustration creeping in. "Ain't enough to feed us, let alone sell." Thomas leaned back, chewing on a straw. "The river don't rush for no man." Then suddenly, a jerk. A violent, unexpected tug nearly pulled the pole out of Eli's hands. "Whoa! Thomas, it's a big one." The line bent like it had caught onto a log. Both brothers leaned back, muscles straining, their boots sliding on the slick floorboards. The rope creaked. Whatever it wasn't fighting like a fish. It was heavy. "Feels dead," Thomas muttered. "Could be an old trunk." But when it surfaced, dark, barnacle-crusted, glinting faintly under the sun, both men froze. It was a chest. They hauled it aboard with effort, water streaming from its edges. The chest was iron-bound, with corners green from rust and hinges crusted with time. Its wood was thick, oak perhaps, though the river had worn it soft. Eli's eyes widened with childlike awe. "You think it's treasure?" Thomas, older and wary, didn't answer right away. He ran his hand over the latch, corroded but intact. "Could be anything. Old tools, maybe a captain's belongings, maybe—" He paused, looking down at the river. "Something that was meant to stay buried." Eli laughed nervously. "You sound like Pa, talking about river spirits." Thomas gave a half-smile but didn't respond. He'd seen too much on this river, bodies after floods, wreckage after storms, remnants of the war that never quite washed away. Still, curiosity was stronger than caution. "We'll take it home," he said finally. "See what the river's brought us." By the time they rowed back to shore, word had already spread. News traveled fast along the river bend, faster than good fortune ever did. A farmer named Caleb Dyer had spotted them pulling the strange object from the water and was waiting by the dock when they returned, his eyes wide with gossip. "Heard you boys hooked a treasure chest. Confederate gold, maybe?" Thomas shook his head. "Just an old box. Probably junk." But when he and Eli carried it up the path to their cabin, two more townsfolk trailed behind, whispering. "Those Mercers finally caught luck," someone said. "Bet they're rich now." Inside the cabin, Mary was sitting near the fire, pale but smiling faintly. "What's that you've brought?" Eli set it down carefully. "We don't know yet." Thomas looked around at the neighbors peering through the window. "We'll find out tonight, when there's no audience." He shut the door, locking out both the chill and the curiosity of the town. That night, the brothers worked by lamplight. The chest sat on the table, dripping faintly onto the floor. Mary watched from her chair, her frail hands clasped in her lap. Thomas wedged a chisel beneath the rusted lock, tapping it with a hammer. Clang, clang. On the third strike, the lock gave. The lid creaked open with a groan that sounded almost alive. Inside were bundles of oilcloth, a few faded photographs, and a small wooden box with letters burned into the top. CWH, no gold, no jewels. Only the scent of old paper and river water. Eli lifted one of the letters, careful not to tear the brittle envelope. "They're addressed to a woman. Clara Harlan." Thomas leaned closer, reading the return mark. "Captain Charles W. Harlan, Steamboat Morning Star." Eli frowned. "Morning Star? Wasn't that the one that sank down river years back?" Thomas nodded slowly. 1865, war era. They said everyone aboard went down. They opened one letter, dated March 17th, 1865. The ink had bled, but the words were still clear enough. "My dearest Clara, the war takes men far from home, but I swear my heart stays with you. When this voyage ends, I'll return, and we'll build the house by the water like we dreamed. Until then, the river is my road back to you." Eli swallowed hard. He must have died before he could send it. Another letter followed, then another, a series of tender messages written in hope, each one signed, "Yours until the river brings me home." Thomas sat back, silent. These are love letters that never reached their shore. The small box inside the chest contained a silver locket, tarnished but intact, with two initials engraved inside, C and C. Eli whispered, "Captain Charles and Clara." Thomas closed the box gently. "This isn't treasure, Eli. It's someone's life that the river forgot to return." By dawn, Thomas was already hitching the mule to the wagon. "I'm going into town," he said. "Somebody must remember the name." Eli stayed behind with Mary, sorting through the letters. The handwriting grew weaker with each one, as if the captain had written his last just before disaster. The final envelope bore a chilling note. "If this finds you, Clara, know that my love has never drifted from you. Whatever the river takes, it cannot steal love." When Thomas returned that evening, his expression was grave but curious. I asked around. Old Rusk at the store remembers a widow named Clara Harlan, lived up near the ridge. Said she used to sit on her porch every night watching the river. Died about 10 years back. Eli sighed. "So she never knew he loved her till the end?" Thomas hesitated. "Maybe not. But there's more. Rusk says Clara had a niece, Anna May Whitley. She still lives upriver. 2 days later, they set out upriver. The morning was clear, the water calm again, as if the Missouri herself approved of their mission. Eli rowed while Thomas guided. The wooden chest sat between them, covered in a canvas tarp. "You sure about this?" Eli asked. "We could have sold the locket, maybe got a few dollars." Thomas looked out at the current. "You can't sell a man's memory, Eli." We found something sacred. Eli smiled faintly. You always were the stubborn one. Maybe, Thomas said. But Pa used to say, the river remembers. Maybe this is its way of finishing what it started. Hours later, as the sun dipped low, they saw smoke from a chimney up ahead. The Whitley farm. The house was old but sturdy, perched on a hill with a view of the winding river below. Chickens pecked at the yard while a lone woman stood on the porch, watching as the brothers pulled their skiff to shore. She was in her early 30s, auburn hair tied under a bonnet, her face touched by both strength and sorrow. "Can I help you?" she asked, wary of strangers. Thomas removed his hat. "Ma'am, forgive the intrusion. We came across something in the river. Belonged to your aunt, Clara Harlan." Her eyes widened slightly. "Aunt Clara? I never met her, but Mama used to tell me stories. Said she waited every evening for her husband's steamboat that never came home." Eli gently placed the chest on the porch. "Well, ma'am, seems the river finally kept its promise." Anna May stepped forward, kneeling beside it, her fingertips trembling as she lifted the first letter. Tears welled in her eyes as she read the faded words aloud. Words written by a man she'd never known, to a woman who had waited a lifetime. She looked up at the brothers, voice breaking. "You didn't just pull something from the river, you brought love back to shore." Inside the old Whitley farmhouse, the air smelled faintly of cedar and rain. The brothers sat quietly as Anna May laid the letters across her kitchen table, each one fragile and browned by time. The chest looked smaller now, less like a treasure box and more like a messenger from another century. As Anna read through the captain's letters, her voice trembled but grew steadier with each word. "Clara, if the river ever parts us, know that I will find my way home, whether by steamboat or by stars." She paused, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. He loved her so much, and she waited for him every evening, Mama said. The neighbors thought she was foolish, but she used to say, "One day, the river will remember." Thomas folded his arms, his voice low. "Seems the river finally did." Anna looked at the brothers. "You didn't just find old letters. You found their unfinished story." As they went through the last layer of the chest, Anna found a smaller wooden box tucked underneath the letters. Its lid bore the same initials, CWH, etched deep into the grain. When she lifted it open, a gleam of silver caught the candlelight. Inside lay a locket, shaped like a teardrop, engraved with intertwined initials, C and C. She held it gently, as if afraid it might dissolve into air. Below it, folded neatly, was a document wrapped in oilcloth, an unfinished will. The ink was faded but readable. It named Clara Harlan as the rightful inheritor of Captain Harlan's savings, held in the First Missouri Bank of St. Louis. Thomas whistled under his breath. That could be worth something. Eli's brow furrowed. If it's real, it belongs to her family. Anna shook her head slowly. It belongs to love that was never fulfilled. But maybe I can make sure it isn't forgotten. 3 days later, the unlikely trio set out for St. Louis. It was a long, bumpy journey by wagon and ferry, past bare fields and smoky towns rising from the riverbank. For Thomas and Eli, it was their first trip beyond Benton's Crossing. Eli sat quietly beside Anna, watching the water shimmer under the sunlight. "Strange, isn't it? We fish the river every day, but it still finds ways to surprise us." Anna smiled faintly. "That's what life does too." By the time they reached the bustling city, the air was thick with coal smoke and the clang of streetcars. The First Missouri Bank towered above them, marble pillars, brass lamps, and clerks who looked like they'd never seen mud in their lives. Thomas cleared his throat, feeling out of place in his river-stained clothes. "We're here about an account. Captain Charles W. Harlan." The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "Captain Harlan? That's an old name. You have proof?" Anna handed him the will, trembling slightly. The man disappeared into a back room. Every minute felt like an hour. When the clerk returned, a gray-haired bank president was with him. "Miss Whitley," he said, smiling politely, "it seems you've brought us quite the relic. The account exists, untouched since 1865. He showed them the ledger, and there it was. Captain Charles W. Harlan, $1,200 deposit, the old banker continued. With accrued interest over these years, the balance now stands at $2,876.45. Eli blinked. Thomas's jaw tightened. For them, that was a fortune, enough to pay every debt, fix their boat, and keep Mary's medicine stocked for years. Anna exhaled shakily. Then his promise to her wasn't lost after all. The banker nodded. Sometimes history just waits for the right hands to come along. When they returned to Benton's Crossing, the story of their discovery spread like fire through dry grass. But Anna, true to her word, didn't keep the money just for herself. She divided the inheritance 3 ways. 1/3 to restore Clara Harlan's old house, 1/3 for the church and schoolhouse, and 1/3 for the Mercer brothers. Thomas shook his head when she told them. "We can't take that," Anna insisted. "You brought her story home." "You deserve to share in its grace." Eli looked to his brother, then to Mary, whose cheeks had color again thanks to the medicine they'd been able to buy. He spoke softly. "Sometimes doing right pays you back in ways you don't expect." Thomas smiled faintly. "Maybe the river rewards the honest after all." In the months that followed, Benton's Crossing transformed. People came from miles around to see the chest of the Missouri Bend, as folks called it. They'd gather at the Whitley home where Anna displayed the letters and the locket, framed behind glass. Preachers spoke of it in sermons. Children learned the story at the Little River Schoolhouse. The Mercers were no longer just fishermen. They became symbols of humility and faith in what's right. Old Man Rusk even built a sign by the water's edge that read, "Where Love Surfaced, 1875. Thomas, who'd once been known as the quiet one, started teaching young boys how to fish. But before every lesson he'd tell them, "The river's full of secrets, boys. But it gives only to those who respect it." One summer night, a storm rolled down from the north. The wind howled like a living thing, and the river rose, furious and wild. Lightning tore through the sky, lighting up the water in violent flashes. The brothers rushed to the dock to secure their nets, but the waves were already too strong. Their old skiff, the same one that had carried the chest, broke free and vanished into the darkness. By dawn, the storm had passed. The town was quiet. Trees bent and fields flooded. The brothers stood on the bank, watching debris drift past. Eli sighed. "Guess the river took back her due." Thomas put a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe. But what it gave us, no storm can wash that away." Weeks later, Anna visited the Mercer cabin with a wrapped bundle. Inside was a framed letter, one of the first the captain had written, the same one that had started it all. "To whoever finds this, know that love is a current. It carries what matters forward." Anna hung it above their fireplace. "It belongs here," she said. "You're part of their story now. Maybe the river wanted it this way." Thomas nodded slowly. "Maybe it did." Eli smiled. "Every time we fish, I'll remember him and her." That evening, as the brothers sat by the fire, the candlelight flickered across the framed letter, the ink glowing faintly like embers that refused to die. Years passed like water flowing downstream. The Mercers grew older, their hair silver as the river mist. Mary recovered, and their small family thrived. Eli's son, Samuel, took to fishing just like his father, curious, patient, and respectful of the river. One crisp autumn morning, Samuel ran up from the bank holding something in his hand. "Pa, Uncle Thomas, look what I found." It was a coin, tarnished but gleaming with the initials CWH stamped faintly into its face. Eli's eyes softened. "The captain's still watching over us." Thomas chuckled. "Then we best keep fishing honest, or he'll pull our lines himself." They laughed, a sound carried by the breeze across the Missouri, blending with the song of the water. When the brothers finally grew too old to fish, the townsfolk still spoke of their story. Travelers passing through Benton's Crossing would stop to see the chest, the letters, and the framed note that had outlived its author by decades. People didn't just come to see a treasure. They came to feel something. A reminder that even in a hard world, love and goodness can surface when you least expect them. On quiet mornings, when mist rose low and the river ran calm, folks swore they could see the faint outline of an old steamboat drifting across the bend, its paddle wheel turning in silence. And sometimes, when the air was still, they said you could hear a man's voice whisper through the fog, "Whatever the river takes, it cannot steal love." Eli and Thomas Mercer's names were eventually carved into a wooden post by the shore, not as heroes or legends, but as fishermen who listened when the river spoke. Because in the end, it wasn't gold they pulled from the water. It was a promise kept, a love returned, and a town reminded that decency never truly sinks.